And well, as Amy said, my name is Erica Allen. I'm president of PFLAG New Hampshire. I've been involved with PFLAG for about 3 years now, a little over 3 years. Now, there's a local PFLAG in my neighborhood that I started going to, and it's just been a wonderful, wonderful collaboration since. So what I thought I would do, I'm going to try to mind the chat, but I will confess that I may not be very responsive to it while I'm going through my narrative. I'm just not that competent at multitasking. I am going to share some information in the beginning on some terms. I want to make sure that the terms that I reference in the narrative are familiar to everybody. I wouldn't be surprised if most people are familiar with them, but I'd hate to think that anybody would be missing out because they don't understand a particular term. So I'm going to go, I have a bunch, there's about a half a dozen in alphabetical order. And the first term that I refer to is androgynous, which, if you're not familiar with it, simply characterizes somebody who, in the way they express themselves publicly, their clothing, their manner, it's hard to tell if they're male or female. They could identify, people just cannot really tell. It's a middle ground, if you will. Another term that I want to share is binary. This is a term that is referenced a lot more these days. It's usually actually the non-binary that's referenced. And binary is an important term. It defines gender in a very black and white way. You have one end of the binary, which would be male or female, and at the opposite end would be female or male. And that's important to understand in reference to non-binary, which I'll get to in a little bit. So the next term that I have, this is why you don't want me trying to manage chat questions, because this is a little bit of work. So the next one I have is called, and this is a very, very important term, is gender dysphoria. And this is an important term to understand. It's a characteristic of people in the trans community who are not able to embrace their identity, that they feel who they are inside. And for instance, using myself as an example, I was born into a body that at birth was assigned having the gender of male. And as you'll soon understand, my whole life I've never felt that way. And the dysphoria is the feeling that you get when you have this conflict of how you present, how you're seen, how people expect you to behave, and actually how you feel. And that is one of the big challenges for people in the trans community who are not able to celebrate and embrace their identity. Another term that is relevant is what's called gender expression. And gender expression is essentially the external presentation, how people present themselves on the outside. It's not what's inside, it's like, how do you dress? What's your manner? How do you like to be called? What do you prefer to be called, he or she or they, or what is it that you feel and how you express that. I have a couple more. Gender identity. This is another very important concept, and it has to do, here I go trying to cut and paste and talk, with how a person feels inside, in their soul, in their heart, in their brain, in their mind, about how they identify in terms of male or female or somewhere along that spectrum, and that non-binary spectrum. And that has no relationship to gender orientation or sexual orientation, I should say, where people may have a preference, are attracted to men or women that has nothing to do with gender identity. Gender identity is all about how you feel about your identity. And the last one I think I have is the last one. Nope, I do have a couple more. I'll try to get through these quickly, but I think they're important to cover. So the next one is gender transition. I think hopefully that's the one that is fairly straightforward. It is something that I have gone through, and fortunate transgender people who do go through it experience, which is essentially embracing and claiming your gender identity. In other words, I stopped presenting as a man, and I went through a long process to embrace my identity. And again, as you can see described there, it talks about how you present, how you want to be recognized, and so on and so forth. And so that's the actual process of going through that change. And let me see, a couple more. Too many darn screens. LGBTQ, I think hopefully everybody is familiar with that. There are probably another dozen letters that we could add on to that, but I can't myself even keep track of all of them. And that essentially is an acronym that represents lesbian, gays, bisexual people, transgender, and queer. And then of course there are many more after that. But this is LGBT and LGBTQ are the most common acronyms that you'll see. The next one that I have is transgender or trans. And that is a term that captures basically anybody. And this is not always understood by people. It's anybody who doesn't identify with the body or the gender they were assigned at birth. So that is people such as myself who identify as a woman, though I was assigned male. It also applies to people who are in between, who are non-binary, they just do not identify with what they were, the traditional role or assignment of male and female. So trans is not just male to female or female to male. It encompasses everything. And the last one that I have, and I reference this because, again, because of my narrative, is transvestite. And it's an important distinction to make between a transvestite and somebody who is transgender, because the big difference there is that as a transgender person, that really describes who you are on the inside, how you feel. And transvestite is much more about how you express yourself, your presentation, and without necessarily actually identifying that way. So the reason I bring it up is just so that people can understand that there is a difference. There's a whole host of other terms like this, but for the sake of time and for you, I'm going to move past these. These are the ones that I really wanted you to know. So I'm going to now at this point go into its personal narrative, and I hope to give you kind of a sense of what it's like to be a trans person. I mean, I'm only speaking for myself, but I think there's some very universal ideas here.
Oh, Erica, so I do have someone, Chuck asked, sorry to interrupt, but I think this is important to address now. They asked about cisgender, and that many don't understand that term.
Yeah, that's a great question. So cisgender is almost a responsive descriptive to being non-binary or transgender. In other words, we have our labels, and well, what do you say about somebody who's not transgender? Cisgender essentially describes a person who does identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. The doctor said, you're a boy, you're a girl, and as you grow up and grow into life and live, yeah, that just, you feel it. That's how you feel. And so I have another one there too I will jump into. So, and that, the funny thing about that term is people who are cisgender are not necessarily familiar with the fact that that's the term to describe them. It's like, what is cisgender? I'm cisgender. Am I sick? What have I got? And it's just a way of identifying, using identifying language to kind of create the contrast, if you will. Somebody asked Dan about queer. Queer has undergone a bit of a transformation over time. I'm not going to claim to be able to give you the Merriam-Webster definition, although you know what? Maybe I can. I actually can. It's the simple definition here is a term that is used. Let me just paste it in there. People who, well, it says there, I'm going to read it because I wasn't prepared for this curveball. Fluid identities and orientations. It basically, and I agree with this definition. I think that's probably why I chose it. It's the definition of queer has broadened to essentially, as I was going to say, if you talk about the LGBTQ community, queer now means anybody who's essentially not cisgender and not straight. It's the rest of us who don't fit into that traditional view that society, civilization has kind of gloms onto. So it's really a very broad term, and it used to be back decades ago, and believe it or not, I remember this. It was a pejorative term. When you called somebody queer, you might as well have called them, well, I won't use the words because I believe there are young people in the audience, but it was a pejorative term. It was intended as a way to basically hurt somebody. And the LGBTQ, or the queer community, in the last, let's see, 5-6 years has reclaimed it and said, we are queer and we are proud of it. And so now if you call somebody queer, assuming that you are not using it the way it was before, you're not actually insulting them. But you do have to mind that. You don't want to just hurl it at somebody, if you will. So what I will do, if there are more terms that people want to know about, maybe at the end we can fold them in, because honestly, there are so many terms. But I appreciate the ones that were brought up because they are quite relevant. So without further ado, Amy, quick question. I just want to make sure that the audio and the video is good.
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. I can see you perfectly. If anyone is having issues, please mention it in the chat, but I'm not having issues on my end, so.
All right, well, hopefully everybody has good connectivity. So, people often ask me, when did you first know you were trans? And that turns out to be a difficult question to answer. It presupposes some level of understanding of gender identity, which as a young child was beyond me. And in general, good information was not easily accessible, and the subject itself was taboo. So I learned about gender identity from observation and experience over a lifetime. What I did learn was defined by rigid social and cultural beliefs. And it was decades before I managed to winnow out fiction from fact and begin to make sense of, well, what I was. As a toddler, I started to notice differences between the women and the men in my family, and most of these were very stereotypically traditional. My mother and my sister dressed in exciting and colorful ways. My mother was, gentle and nurturing. My father was strong and he was imposing. My mom kept house and my dad ruled it. She tended to the domestic chores and he worked in his study, or he, tinkered in his workshop. She stayed home and he taught at university. And it was those experiences early on that, they had a huge influence on my perspective on gender as I was growing up. So in those years before grade school, as I began to explore my world, I was unaware that I was on a collision course with a perplexing prescription for how I was expected to behave and express myself. My parents were constantly admonishing me regarding, my feminine expressions. And they seemed, these corrections, if you will, they seemed no different than any of the other limits I was learning. So when my mother would tell me not to play with her clothes, it was to me no different than when she told me not to touch the hot stove. It was my parents looking out for me. What I didn't realize that was over time, I was slowly being taught to behave like my brother, but I just had no idea. And my brother and sister, they were over 10 years older than I. And I had no idea what other children were experiencing. So I didn't realize that my parents were correcting my behavior so much. I loved and trusted them, and I wanted to please them. And I know they loved me, and I know they wanted the best for me. So, but I could feel that something was wrong, something was off. And that kind of made me uncomfortable and definitely uneasy. And so I have to say that in the traditional binary perspective that appeared to inform my parents, boys and men are at one end of the gender spectrum and girls and women are at the opposite. And what I learned in my childhood is that the gulf that lies between them is vast and the rules are endless. So I did my best to adapt and make my parents happy, despite the fact that it just felt awkward and wrong. And quite frankly, it was just constant work. I just did not take to it naturally. Grade school was when I began to really recognize that my early behaviors were different. Overnight, I was immersed in a teeming community of boys and girls my age, and I couldn't help but notice obvious gender differences with bathrooms, sports, clothing, and many more things. Boys were more aggressive in size and strength and speed, greatly influenced status. Girls seemed calmer, softer, and as far as I could tell, chattier. And socially, it was fine for girls to like art and music, but not so much for the boys. And that was kind of an issue for me. As grade school progressed, an unspoken understanding to congregate with your own gender grew. Boys who socialized with girls jeopardized their status. And early on, I also realized I was expected to be like the boys. It made me feel very uncomfortable, but it seemed impossible to do anything else. I didn't have a lot in common with them. The girls, on the other hand, were more interesting, and I did everything I could to interact with them. And I didn't know anybody like me. And I did not have a clue why I seemed so different. And I had no words, for what I was. And I was living in fear that others would discover that I kind of felt like a girl. So what I did was I kept a small circle of friends, was a good student, and I was grateful that people basically thought I was a nerdy bookworm. It was definitely a step up from otherwise. And then with adolescence, I began to experience the relentless onset of puberty. Skin, hair, odor, features, they all began to change in horrifying ways. And the worst was to hear the deepening of my voice. And it was the first time that gender dysphoria hit me. And I felt kind of like I was losing myself. And I actually tried to stop it. I did crazy things like shaving my body because I couldn't stand all this stupid simian hair that was growing in. But those efforts just boomeranged back at me by amplifying my, the feeling that I was just so different from everybody. Fortunately, by the time I got to high school, I'd had enough practice that I knew how to act like a boy well enough to feel relatively safe. However, two major changes came into play. First, my feminine feelings were increasing, as well as my fear of those feelings. I was also confused by and afraid of my awakening sexuality. And second, while this division between the genders in elementary school and middle school was challenging enough, those disintegrating barriers in high school, where they're coming back together, were a whole other level of difficult. I had no idea how to engage in the mysterious rituals between the sexes, and acting on my desires and feelings was out of the question. On top of all this, I also discovered that I was attracted to both sexes. So at a time when homophobia was prevalent, and this is back in the 70s, I dared not share my feelings or thoughts with anyone. I became socially paralyzed, avoided crowds and parties. But one thing I gotta say is that whatever, for their own reasons, it seemed like all the other students, or many of the other students, were just as petrified. So I don't know if that too many people noticed. It's an awkward age. When I was 18, my father, he startled me with an unexpected declaration. He said, "If you turn out to be gay, I won't have anything to do with you." I reeled with confusion and a renewed fear. I mean, the tenuous tethers that had bound me to family just seemed suddenly frayed, undone. And I wondered, what did he know? What had I done? And more than anything else, why was he so angry? It was one of many moments in my life that confirmed my fears that this difference in me did not sit well with others. So I got filled with anxiety, mostly because I was afraid of being abandoned by people I loved if they found out how I felt. And so I just kind of went deeper into hiding. When I went to college in the 80s, it was pretty clear that anything outside of the prevailing notions of sexual orientation and identity were relegated to the underground or to entertainment stereotypes. In secrecy, I actually gravitated to those marginalized communities. There was one area in New Brunswick, New Jersey, on the other side of literally the railroad tracks from Rutgers campus where I was going to school. Also, when I could, I ventured into New York City, where my exposure to the trans community was limited to flamboyant drag queens and transvestites. And I didn't really feel anything in common with them. And basically, I still did not know anybody like me. I also learned, and this is a bitter pill to swallow, that in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is it's kind of a Bible for the psychiatric community, that I and others like me were diagnosed or considered mentally ill. So by the time I left college, I was certain that actually there was something very wrong with me. So a few years later, I met and fell in love with and finally married a wonderful woman. I believed that my love for her would overcome this inner secret I had determined to bury. And we began to build a life together. We embarked on our careers. We started a family. And life was actually suddenly good. But because of a secret that I was really just determined to hide, nonetheless, I learned over the next 25 years that being a man was nothing but a constant struggle with tension, repressed anger, and difficulty connecting with others. Though I wished to, and I tried to find joy in marriage and children, I couldn't. Over time, I grew into a moody and controlling, impatient, and resentful husband and father. In fact, throughout those years, I lived like a deep cover spy, wearing a permanent camouflage of manhood. But I could never shake the beckoning within. It clawed at my heart, and sometimes it overwhelmed me. My confidence was withered by fear of exposure and living in hiding. I felt horribly dishonest. And with each passing year, I slipped deeper into the darkness of hopelessness. Yet, I was also grappling with the dawning awareness that this thing inside me was in fact me, and I was trying to kill it. By my late 40s, while I was to all outward appearances a happy and successful person, inside I was a wreck. I had reached a dangerous point when I concluded that if I finished out my life never having lived, life was no longer worth living. I dealt with this for nearly a year, thinking and considering its meaning and about the potential consequences to those I loved. And desperate as I was, ready as I was, I knew I did not want to die, yet I could no longer tolerate not being alive. So I left only one option. I had to transition. And thank God I did. I knew it would be the hardest thing I would ever do. I had no idea how my future would play out, where I would land, and the sacrifices I might have to make. I had by then been married for nearly 25 years with 2 young adult children. I was far along in a successful career. I had a network of close friends, and I had strong roots in my community. In my mind, all that I cherished, all that I achieved, was at risk. This is a great fear that trans persons struggle with in choosing to claim their identity. To make that choice is to understand that there's a strong possibility you will lose much or all that is dear to you. It took me a long time, about 6 years, to transition. I was determined to take the time I felt was needed to preserve that which I cherished. I did not want to lose my marriage. I did not want to lose my family. I did not want to jeopardize my career. And I did not want to end up alienated and miserable. I resolved not to give in to the idea that I should have to sacrifice so much just to be me. Interestingly enough, as I began my journey, it was with the growing belief that it was not I who had a problem, but society. And today I'm quite sure of that. I had no idea what the journey would be like, how I would get there, wherever there was, or what to expect. I simply knew I had to start going in a feminine direction, and that I had to progress cautiously. I didn't think to seek support, guidance, or role models. Instead, I ventured forth on my own, swapping out the fear of discovery for the fear of the unknown. When I first came out to strangers and people I was not close to, because there was really nothing at stake if they rejected me. But eventually, though, I had to come out to family and friends. And I feared relationships would end. I'll say that for many close to me, it was a long, bumpy, and sometimes painful road to acceptance, during which I fretted things would end badly. There's not enough time to describe this long process of my transition, but I will share 2 of the approaches I adopted during that time. The first was to commit to always having as much consideration for those around me as I hoped they would have for me. I recoiled at the notion of entitlement, that it was my right to transition and everyone had better accept it. Yes, it is my right, but it was not an approach that I was comfortable with. The second was to commit to face every day a new fear. When I think back, I realized that it was easier to face the fear of small change then that of drastic change. And also, each small success helped me develop mental toughness and confidence. And over the next few years, I transformed myself, passing through a pretty challenging period of androgyny. If you saw me in the streets, I probably caught your attention. Before reaching full transition, I think it's actually over 3 years now. To my amazement, over and over, I found that people at work, in my community, friends, and most importantly, family, were able to accept, respect, support, care about, and to my great surprise, even sometimes admire me. Today, I feel mostly liberated from that pain, anxiety, misery, anger, resentment that I used to feel. And counting my blessings, I still have my family, my job, my friends, and my community. But I have to say, as happy as that sounds, don't be fooled. Even after a successful transition, while life can be much better, it is not, I should say, it's rarely easy. There are often serious issues with mental health, frequent challenges with acceptance, and significant obstacles to economic success. Transgender people, including myself here, often suffer from mental illnesses such as severe anxiety, depression, eating disorders, etc. Rejection by family and friends is not uncommon, and careers can be forever set back. For many in society who are accepting, transgender people remain such an enigma that their eagerness to demonstrate support often compels them to inadvertently shine a spotlight on our differences with inappropriate questions and comments intended to convey support, surprisingly enough. As trans people, we are continuously reminded of our differences, even by the best intentioned people. Not too long ago, a colleague of mine, he was new to our organization and reached out to me for help and asked if we could meet. And at that time, based on the limited contact I had with him, I was a little worried about how accepting he would be. This concern comes with the territory of being trans. You are conditioned to expect that at any time, people will have difficulty with who you are. Coworkers can easily abide workplace policies that mandate respect, but if they consider it a transgression of their values and they reject the validity of trans coworkers, they can effectively undermine their trans colleagues in subtle but harmful ways. They can withhold valuable information, come up with reasons to avoid collaboration, ignore effectiveness or success, or simply avoid asking for help when you have it to give. To my relief, everything actually went well. He seemed completely oblivious to my difference and seemed more intent on peppering me with questions about our organization and my team, and I was very happy to answer those questions. And in the end, he sincerely thanked me for the help and said he was excited to continue working with me. He must have meant it, because in the 2 years since, we have forged a strong working partnership based on trust, respect, and collaboration. How normal. After that meeting, I had a realization of something simple but fundamental. All I wanted at this point in my life was to be treated and regarded as a whole person. I wanted what I had as a man, to engage in my community without the unnerving mental noise that arises when others, for whatever reason, visibly key in on my transness. In fact, this is true for anyone marked by difference, whether it be culture, religion, appearance, orientation, identity, so on. The obvious roots of this, as far as I'm concerned, are based in ignorance, which leads to fear, and at its worst, revulsion, hate, and violence. So my question is, how can we bridge these gaps where there's ignorance? We, in the trans community, we can do what others before us have done. We can engage politically, we can educate, we can advocate, we can protest, we can form alliances, we can be visible. But for those on the outside of the community who wish to help, there are many ways that are no different than how you might help anyone on the margins. Welcome us into your communities. Work to understand us. Provide us equal opportunities. Treat us with respect, especially in the workplace. Join us when we speak out. Stand up for us when we are threatened or attacked. Do not let the bigoted behaviors of others go unchallenged. Be considerate of us as we work to navigate through transition. Get over our sometimes distinctive differences. Instead, honor us all in our myriad forms, from the privileged who pass unnoticed, to those who don't, to the most flamboyant among us. Let us see that we are not alone. If there is one message I'd like to share, it's this. Do not focus only on how to support us with the struggles of transition. Yes, it is valuable to show us that you accept our transness and will support us as we cope with transition-related struggles. But please understand that being trans does not and should not exclusively define who we are. We share with everyone common passions, values, needs, frustrations, and desires. I am more than trans. I am a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, a friend, a colleague, a landlord, a chef, a traveler. I speak 3 languages, and there's so much more. Focusing on our transness does not honor everything else that forms our identities. Accept, respect, and treat us as whole, complex, valid individuals. It is the right thing to do and crucial to our well-being. I'm almost done. On my staff is a man I supervise. Prior to coming out at work, I dreaded the prospect of revealing that I was trans to him. I had known him for 10 years by that time. And the profile that I had formed of him was bleak at best. He could be very difficult to work with. He was often annoyed, he was staunchly conservative, and he visibly telegraphed his frustrations with others. He's the kind of guy that if he didn't like what he heard, you could just see this look of disgust, annoyance, and he was looking down on you for being so stupid. And that so clearly defined him. And he knows this because I told him about this. And I also had firsthand knowledge that he did not have a very charitable view of people like me. Very good firsthand knowledge. But the interesting thing is, we worked incredibly well together. We shared workplace philosophy. It was amazing. We were always in sync when it came to work. So as the eventuality of my transition loomed, I was like, how am I going to deal with this? So I wrote a long, carefully worded letter describing my journey up to then and my intention to fully transition in 6 months. I was planning. So my only request to him was that we continue to work together as well as we had before. Seemed like not a lot to ask for. Seemed very reasonable. Just wanted to be able to do our job. So with trepidation, I snuck this letter into his backpack late on a Friday afternoon, just before he left for the weekend. I was casing him. I knew his routine. And at that point, I felt as if I had just jumped into an abyss. So about an hour later, as I was driving home, I had to pull over to read the text that he had just sent. And I still have that text. This is what he wrote. I just found your letter. You are amazing and very strong. It takes courage to unveil oneself, especially to this degree. The text cannot convey how much I admire this step and my commitment to ensuring nothing changes between us. P.S. Full transparency. This is not a surprise. Needless to say, I was left in tears. Over 3 years later, he has remained true to that text. He is one of my greatest allies and friends at work, and we are closer colleagues than ever. When I am with him, I forget that I am trans. If you can make the trans people you know or come into contact with, or for that matter, anyone who struggles in the margins of society, feel the way he and others have made me feel, you will have done a great service. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, that was so beautiful and powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So I guess at this point in time, if anyone has any questions for Erica, feel free to ask them.
Yes, indeed.
So we obviously, we can't see you, we can't hear you, but you're welcome to type in any questions that you have in the chat box. I'm just going to read off. You might be able to see this already, but Lynn said, thank you so much, Erica. Your candid and beautifully spoken words are amazing and courageous.
Thank you, Lynn.
And Anne said, thank you, Erica. The talk was wonderfully heartfelt.
Hi, Anne. Oh, I know Anne. She's a friend of mine. I didn't.
Oh, good.
I'm so glad she joined us. So
I guess in the meantime, I mean, while we're waiting, if anyone wants to ask questions, could you talk a little bit about PFLAG and if people want to get involved with them, how they can get involved and what exactly the group does?
Yes, that's actually a really good thing. I didn't know if I could squeeze it in, and I didn't talk about it, and it's only fair to mention PFLAG because PFLAG has been it's an organization that's meant an awful lot to me and a lot of people in this world in the LGBTQ community. It's an old organization, it's relative to the community. I need my glasses actually just to be sure I'm not saying things wrong, but PFLAG goes back to 1972, it all started in Queens, New York. There was a woman named Jean Manford, and she, along with her husband, and unfortunately I don't have his name handy, but they had a gay son. His name was Morty, and he was a gay activist. And what she had discovered is that he had been beaten while distributing flyers at a political gathering in New York City. And well, she was a pretty good protective mother, and so she took action. I mean, they made a mistake with picking on her family. So she started writing letters about police indifference to her son's beating and just their routine brutality to the gay and lesbian community. And essentially, she held society to account for this. She said she was on the radio, she was doing television interviews, and she was active in Pride. And it was during one of these Pride events, in fact, early on, back in, as I said, well, I don't know if it was 72 or 73, but she brought this banner, this homemade banner, and on it it said, "Parents of gays unite in support for our children." And this really resonated, especially in the New York City area. And ultimately, as a result of that, she thought that, you know what, let's create an organization for these parents and of gay and lesbian people in an attempt to bring them together. You know, bring the gay and lesbian community together with the supportive, or their families at least, and they may not have been completely supportive, and so that, you know, they could come together and actually honestly face some of the challenging issues of the day. And from that point on, it's almost 50 years later now, PFLAG has grown into the largest organization in the United States that provides support for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. It's grown to encompass that whole alphabet soup. And, you know, across the country, we have nearly 400 chapters. And here in New Hampshire, we have 4 in Concord, where I'm located, in Manchester, in Portsmouth, close to you, and also in Nashua. And we have more than 200,000 members, supporters, and we have a very, very simple mission. You know, it's a very, very important mission, which is to provide safe spaces for support groups. To me, this is a shout out to Ann Dawson. She is been with PFLAG a long time. I can't even begin to fathom the years, and she is a facilitator. I'm not going to talk anymore about her private life, but I will tell you that she is a phenomenal woman, and she has been religiously dedicated to showing up once a month for 2 hours to give her time to create that safe space for people who want to come and hear what other people are experiencing in the community, maybe learn from them, derive some sense of unity, community. And that work that we do is precious. But beyond that, we also do outreach. I would say that that's kind of what I'm doing here. And we also work to educate. We have an amazing library of publications that come out of our national office that are available if you go to PFLAG.org. That's the national. There are wonderful, wonderful publications available for free on, you know, for parents, for allies, for people themselves who are on LGBTQ. We have them in Spanish. We have issues helping people in places of worship, and also in school. These are valuable resources, and I highly encourage any of you who are looking for that to go to pflag.org, or you can go to our website here, pflag-nh.org, and you'll be able to find our publications there too. So for those of you who may be interested in support, or what we do here, which is outreach. That's what we do. On our website, PFLAG-NH.org, I feel like a shill when I say that, but I mean, I know what I'm presenting here is such a valuable resource. Take advantage of it. We do really good work, and I will say this unabashedly, we save lives. I've attended more than my share of support groups because I tend to go to not just the Concord one now. Now that we're online, we've gone online because of COVID, thank you very much. One of the benefits of that is we can reach further and wider than we ever have before because the internet has no kind of physical limits, geographical limits. But it's something to avail yourselves of. And I will tell you the work that we do in those support groups, really, it's magical. The last thing I think I was going to say, if I can remember it, was, oh yes, Amy said I shouldn't forget to mention this. If any of you have an interest in showing your love of Pride, your support for the community, or you are in the community and you want to celebrate your queerness, in Manchester on June 19th, it's the only place that I know of any significance in the New England area doing an in-person Pride. And it's going to be at Arms Park in Manchester, New Hampshire on June 19th. The festivities start at noon. I believe it just runs for 6 hours. And there will be wonderful speakers there. There will be lots of organizations there from the community or supporting the community, sharing information. There's a lot of fun swag. There'll be music. It's just a great opportunity to kind of connect with the community. And so I'll be there, I can tell you that. And I'm looking forward to it. So I think I've overtalked here, so.
No, you're good. I have a couple more questions about PFLAG. Actually, Chuck, it looks like, says they've been a member of PFLAG since the 1970s. Wow. So awesome. Yay. Shay said, thank you so much for sharing your story. What a beautiful note on which to end it with your coworkers' words. My question was just going to be, how can I get involved with PFLAG New Hampshire? I'm a trans person living in Dover and would love to be more involved in the community up here. And thanks again for sharing your life and transition.
So can I address that one? And do we have enough time? I just want to be mindful. I'm not really paying attention to the time.
No, you're fine.
I noticed there's a few questions. So that I want to thank Shay for that. Anybody who offers to help us is very welcome. Okay, so I have it there. So we do have different ways that you can help. We actually need help right now with some of the events that we're doing. So first, let's start out your way. We have Portsmouth has PFLAG there. Please, if you want to connect with us and contact us, if you go to our website, let me just put it here, PWW, I don't even think you need to do that anymore.
Erica, if you want to send this all to me afterwards as well, I can send an email out to people after, just with all this information.
Sure, that way I can be more efficient. But so, Shay, if you would like to, you feel free to reach out. You'll find on our PFLAG website email addresses for our Portsmouth office. So at some point we hope to go back in person. You're certainly welcome to attend. Depending on what you want to do and depending on your comfort level, there are opportunities to directly help with the support group. Beyond that, organizationally, we always need help. Right now, especially right now with the Pride this month, we have a couple of events that are coming up that, so the first one that comes to mind is in Windham, New Hampshire. They're starting PFLAG, they're starting a Pride this year. And I would, we could use some help attending to our table with our literature and swag to represent us there. I know it's a long way from Dover, but if that's something that you could do, I will be quite frank, we could use help. It's a gap we have right now. So other than that, you can, my email address is publicly available on that website. If you have other things in mind, if you really want to get involved, we have a statewide board, and we have a few vacancies where we could use some help with some specific roles in the organization. And we can talk about that. And then also, you know, if you have specific things that you think you can bring to the table, we can see if we can take advantage of that. So feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, and then one more PFLAG question, and then we're going to move on to it. Owen asked, what does the day-to-day operations look like for PFLAG New Hampshire?
So I'm going to have to kind of try to understand the question, because I know that Owen can't talk. Although, Owen, if you want to, you're welcome, Shay. Owen, if you want to follow up, if you think I'm off track, please do. Day-to-day operations, it depends on the role. I'm quite busy. I have a full-time job outside of this. As you can tell from my stories about the people I work with, I work I work in IT, and I work for the state of New Hampshire. It's a full-time job. My extracurricular life is quite busy. I'm married, I'm a landlord, I have 2 children. I have a wonderful grandchild who, they are actually, my daughter and my grandchild are actually, I'm so glad they joined. They're on this. But PFLAG day-to-day operations are the biggest thing that we do on a routine basis. The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is the support groups that we do. And those happen pretty much on a weekly basis between the 4 locations, Manchester, Nashua, Portsmouth, and Concord. We invariably have a meeting every week. And so that means the facilitators that run these meetings, they have a monthly commitment. It's 2 hours, and it's intense, and it's important. So that's part of I won't call it daily, but it's part of routine operations. I have, we have the basic administration of the organization, which can come from the financial side to the communication side. We have brochures to visibility, where right now it's a big time for us with Pride. So we're doing a lot of organizing, trying to get volunteers, trying to make sure to support. We help out financially with the Pride events because we strongly believe in visibility. We are doing a lot of interesting projects, and that's my favorite area. So this is one of my things that I do on a routine basis. I actually did a talk earlier today. All right, Amy, I'll say it. The Manchester Pride on the 19th, Queen City Pride. I am going to be the keynote speaker there at 1:30. So that's another thing that is fairly a routine. I fit this into my day wherever I can. And I'm so glad that things are easing up a little bit, because COVID really put a damper on that. We also, we do advocacy work at the legislative level. I have an advocacy position that works with legislators, to advance bills that are supportive of our community. We have a very, very big social media presence. All of you are welcome. If this is something that would interest you, we have a private, closed Facebook group, PFLAG New Hampshire. We have over 800 members, that's been phenomenal growth since I've been here. We've doubled in size. And it's a great source for information. You can also find out about our meetings. It's a great community to reach out to others, to see, again, it's a little bit like a support group, how they are dealing with some of the challenges they have in their lives. People can share information on insurance, on doctors, on the workplace, on school. It's a phenomenal resource, and it's super supportive, and it's safe, and I make sure it is because I'm one of the moderators. It's a big thing that I do. And then there's part of the daily routine. I won't say daily, but routine operations are maintaining our website, and then just coordinating the board events. We have to vote on things. We have to, we're going to be funding Pride. We do all kinds of things. We are all volunteer, and we all do this because we believe in it. And that's a challenge because we all have to find a way to fit it into our lives. So I hope that gives you a thumbnail sketch of what we do at PFLAG. And anybody who's interested in getting involved with that, again, Amy, please share my email with everybody, my PFLAG email with everybody on this.
Yes, absolutely. After this, I'm going to, I'll send out, it might not happen tonight, but tomorrow, everyone who's attended, I'll send out an email. I'll send Erica's email with it and any other, I'll send the link to the PFLAG website and any other links that you want me to send, Erica, please let me know and I'll put that in there. But we have a really good, important question from Lily, who works in the school system. She's asking, what is the best way to support a trans teenager who lives in a transphobic household?
Oof, that is, that's a, thank you for asking that question. So, let's say, first of all, with great sensitivity and compassion, and the fact that you even asked the question, I know that's where you're at. So, obviously, the number one important thing here is the safety of that child. And that's, you know, when I think of this, and I think this is highly resonant, this is the same kind of question that people contend with when they might be aware of a spouse who's in an abusive relationship. We don't know, but you don't know what the level of that abuse might be or could be. There is always a safety risk in a situation like this. You never really can know what's going on. You know, so this is not my expertise, so I have to be very cautious how I speak about this. But I can tell you that in the school environment, you have to start from the position of giving that student complete control over the narrative of their life. Nobody is in the position that they're in. Nobody can understand what their family life is and what they're going through and what their experience is in school. You do have control over the school environment. You can make sure, to the very best of your ability, to start by making sure the school is a safe space for them. There's little things. My wife is a teacher, and I admire her on her initiative doing, and if somebody asked a question about my wife, I'd be happy to answer. She has done things like put little pride flags on her door, so that students know that she, you know, the people in the community know, okay, that's a statement. I can feel safe there. Those kind of things matter a lot. Just putting out literature, just anything you can do to visibly demonstrate your support for the community in a public way, if you can do it, and I believe everybody should do this, is manifest. Because not only are you letting the child in question know, but you're making it public. You're aligning themselves. You're showing solidarity in a way that is brave, maybe not. It depends on who you are and the circumstances. But that child may be in a situation where being brave for them is a big deal. They're young, and depending on the environment and depending on their circumstances, they could be terrified. So establishing a place of safety in an environment that you have control over to whatever extent you do is paramount. When it comes to the family circumstances, those are treacherous waters, and you know it. And that is an area of expertise that I have to be careful, and I have to pull myself back on. What I would say, if you really are looking for really good guidance, there is an organization that is very focused on schools. And so, quite frankly, on that part, I'm going to punt. And that is to reach out to GLSEN New Hampshire, glisten.org, GLSEN. They work, their whole focus is on the school environment. And this is their area of expertise. I'm going to put that right up in the, because they deal with policies in schools. They deal with the gay student alliances, GSAs. I'm be mangling the words for the acronym. And they are very directly involved in that environment. So they are a tremendously experienced resource. And a lot of the people in that organization are themselves teachers. So all I can say right now is whatever you can do in your environment to support, and if you need Listen to help you do it, reach out to them because they know the rules, they know the policies. There have been a lot of changes at the state level in government as to what schools must do as far as putting together policies to protect people in the LGBTQ community. So there are resources out there. I hope that's helped. Oh, I put one too many N's in there. I'm just a terrible typist. Like I said, it's a good thing. I think.
Oh, it's just the one N.
I'm just I'm going to put GLSEN. If you Google GLSEN New Hampshire, you'll get there. And they're also on
Okay.
Facebook. So.
Okay, perfect. And then Dawn had a couple questions for you.
I saw them.
First one was, are you allowed to say what your profession or career is or the nature of your work? And two, are you still married to your pre-trans wife?
Two great questions. And only reason I didn't talk about my work is because I didn't want to bore you. I am an IT manager for the state of New Hampshire. I have a team of 20 in the Department of Information Technology. We do security for the state. We do email. I'll say we do enterprise applications. Like I said, I don't want to bore you. We support all the things that everybody everywhere needs: email, access to files, to printing, to being able to log in, to security, to accessing all kinds of resources that everybody uses. That's what I manage. And I've been doing that at the state of New Hampshire since February 28th of 2003. And you didn't ask this, but I'll share it. When I transitioned, it turned out to be a really positive thing because I'm not short, I'm not tall. I'm 5'8" normally. I'm 5'10" in heels, but 5'10" in heels is pretty tall. The average height of a man, I think, is 5'9". So I'm taller than at least half the men there. And by the time I walked into work, the day I presented, I was so confident because I had been presenting publicly for 6 months by then. And that experience of going through that was very valuable to me. In fact, before that, I remember I put earrings in before I transitioned. That was far harder than actually working into work as a trans woman. And the first 2 times I drove into the parking lot, I had to pull them out because I couldn't do it. And I was right, because I remember when I finally showed up the 3rd day with the earrings, this guy I told you about, who was really conservative, he walks up to me in my office, "What's up with the earrings?" And right on the moment, I came up with the best answer, and it was quite true, but not quite in the way he might have thought. I said, "Midlife crisis." Yeah, it was a crisis, and it wasn't my midlife, but maybe not the one that he was thinking. And I just let it go at that, and he didn't bother me. He said, "Okay." And I mean, by that time, he'd seen me wearing makeup. So I'd gone through that. I mean, the period of androgyny was the worst. But by the time I walked into the door, the funny part was when I walked in the door, nobody even recognized me. So I really liked that. So yeah, I work for the state. I work in IT. And since I've transitioned, IT can be a difficult spot. People in IT can be a little bit more conservative, say than just the average. But that's a whole nother story. And I'll just say that my experience in work has been a very positive one, and I wish it could be that way for everybody. But I didn't give them much of a choice either. I told HR, "Get out of my way. I'm going to control the narrative on this and tell people what's going on. And don't you do it." And I didn't tell them why, but they're so clinical, and what they tend to do in HR is tell people, "These are the rules. Treat them with respect. This is going to happen in the bathroom. These are their gender pronouns, and you got to do it." And it's like, I need something a little bit more humanistic than that. And that was very helpful. My wife, yeah, we were married a long time. And going through that was the hardest thing. My kids made it easy by comparison. Actually, they made it easy by comparison about anything. But marriage is one of the things that's really hard for people to transition, especially when your wife, like in my case, she didn't know. And it's not what she signed up for. And it's not something she could just adapt to overnight. But we're still together. And that's because she's an amazing woman. What makes her amazing is she has tremendous compassion. She has a tremendous ability to, well, she has tremendous empathy. And she has the ability to challenge herself. You know, she's the ability to question her beliefs and ask herself, let me think about that all over again. And on my side, I did everything I could to give her space and time to adapt. It's part of the reason it took me so long to transition is like, we talked about every little detail, from shoes to makeup to hair to everything, because all she was asking of me was an opportunity to adapt, to think about, okay, you're gonna put eyeshadow on. Wait, now, I'm not ready for you to put on bottoms that have one hole. This is funny. You know, I was okay for a while to wear 2-hole bottoms, pants, shorts, that was all good. Skirts, dresses, that was a process. And then she used to give me grief for my fashion sense. And I was like, well, what do you expect? You don't give me much of a palette to work with. All I can work with are these 3 colors. So we had some crying times and some laughing times. And we had a lot of pillow talk. A lot. We talked about simple little ideas like putting the toothpaste back in the tube, like maybe we should dial this back, and like we're gonna pretend this never happened. And she had the integrity and the fortitude to say, no, you can't do that. You need to honor who you are, and I respect that. And we're just gonna have to figure out day to day how we work through this, and maybe we will, maybe we won't. And I will say today now that we're closer than ever. Finally, having come out, I can be vulnerable and I can be honest. I can let her in, and she can let me in, because that noise, that lie, no longer stands between us. So there.
Okay.
And we will be together a long time.
Oh, good. She sounds wonderful. She sounds so supportive of you. So, and you said she's a teacher too?
Yeah, she's had a couple of careers. She was an environmental activist in her early years. That's how we met. And then she became a lawyer when we were living out west in Oregon, and a little bit while she was here. And then she just said she wanted to be a teacher. And so for the last 20 years, she's been a teacher at Kearsarge High School. She is the principal French teacher there. And she's really good at all the things that she does.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have a question from Lynn. She's asking, is there a place where we can get a comprehensive list of the definitions relative to the LGBTQ plus community? I work in healthcare and I am passionate about spreading awareness and understanding in a trauma-informed way to coworkers and patients. We have recently changed our intake forms to reflect how individuals identify, but I think a lot of people are curious and just have questions. Oh, sorry, I lost my place. Just have questions on how to approach / ask questions about the LGBTQ community, definitions, etc. As a lesbian, I can educate a bit, but I want to be part of the change in education.
So there are an awful lot of good resources out there, and I just posted one of them that I've gone to. The human rights, what's the C stand for again? I think it's commission, but I'm not. Human rights campaign in New Hampshire. We have an HRC also as part of the state. It's Human Rights Commission, but this is the Human Rights Campaign. They maintain a pretty good glossary of terms. I will say that if you look up a simple Google search of LGBTQ terms with Google or whatever search engine you use, there are a ton of resources out there. I will not say that PFLAG New Hampshire is one of them, because as the administrator of the website, I've not stayed on top of that, but there are a lot of resources, and that's a good departure. Wikipedia has a good definition of terms, but I can understand because you can't know what to look up if you don't know what the term is, but that's a good starting point. And then just again, just doing a search in LGBTQ terms should give you, and anything that ends in a .org is probably a good bet because of the definition of their organization being typically a charitable organization.
Okay, I don't know if we have any other questions. I'll give it a few more minutes if people want to ask a question. I can ask a personal question. So I am pregnant and I am having a baby boy. So my question is, oh, thank you. My question is, how do I create an environment, because the industry is so big on like pink for girls, blue for boys, and being very big on the gender. So how do I create an environment for my child where it lets them be expressive of who they are without pushing a certain gender on them?
Wow. So there actually happens to be somebody I consider an expert in the audience because I watched them raise their child in the most non-gender conditioned way. And it's not something that I expected of them. It's not something that I asked of them, but I have witnessed it. And I will just say a little bit about my own experience, but I will tell you that I consider my daughter a bit of an expert in this arena. And she's in the audience. She actually has my name up there, but she's blacked out.
Oh, do you want to hop on if she feels comfortable? Because I know she's
paying attention. She could, because I will plug for her. She's not expecting this at all, but she's a a young mother, and she has he's almost 3 now, child, and what I've noticed with her, and I wish she if she were paying attention that she could chime in, but because she has that child, she also might be involved taking care of that child, but she doesn't guide his gender expression. She doesn't try to form it. What I see her do is completely undefined by convention. I can't tell you how many times I've seen him in these really cool rainbow pants. And, she also has a tremendous sense of fashion, because I'll see him come out, she's got these really nice colors. They look very boyish, but they only look that way because she's put together an ensemble that's really kind of just nice. But there's no necessarily rhyme or reason. I mean, she doesn't put him in skirts or anything like that. But she doesn't try to lay out some kind of preconceived idea of what how he should present. She goes kind of with the flow of him. And I will tell you that as a child, all those things that my parents did out of good intentions, well, it would have, in my mind, and it's so hard to know how things would have played out. I don't really have regrets, but if they had not worried so much, and in their day it was different. I'm going to give them that. When I gave that, I'm rambling a little bit here, but when my father said what he said, and which was, if you turn out to be gay, da 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 da, One thing I want y'all to know is I don't think my father so much had a problem with me being gay. I don't think he would have rejected me for being gay. I think he was afraid for me. And I think so many parents are. They have a fear of like, oh my gosh, how's my child going to succeed in society? Well, you know, I mean, this is going to be like this big albatross. It's going to hold them back. And I don't want that to happen. The way I know things to happen work. You know, society is going to tolerate you if you're straight and da 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 da. And that was my father's thing. But, you know, in retrospect, today at least, if you can give your child some room to breathe, don't try to impose on your child the way you think it should be. And we do this whether we're with our children, whether they're LGBTQ or whatever. We always have these, so many of us as parents, and I can speak with my experience there, we kind of have these notions of what is good for our child. You know, what's the good path to take to success and safety and security and happiness. And when our children start to do things out of the zaniness of their immaturity that doesn't align with that, you know, it's like, no, wait, don't do that. Go to school, stay in college, get good grades, get a steady job, find a good spouse. You know, we have this prescription for what works. And it's the very same thing with people in the LGBTQ community, you know, and those prescriptions in that community are typically way wrong because they're not based on anything with scientific foundation. They're based on fear for their children. So to pull it back to that, answer that question is, let your child, especially when they're so young, but I don't know that there's any limit on this age, support them because they are innocent. Their expressions, if you're giving your child a safe place and putting food on their plate and not exposing them to real dangers like violence and hate, their expressions are expressions that come from a place that's, what's wrong with that if it's a little different than, or different than something you know. So shutting it down is not really, in my mind, a good way to go. Let them explore themselves, let them find for themselves. And the hard questions will come when they start to tell you things, if they go there, which is a small number, when they start to tell you that they are, maybe like me, a different gender. And then you're going to have to start to think about some difficult things, but there are resources out there to help you. But shutting down their expression of who they are, their innocence for, at that age, to shut it down because somewhere in your lives, whether it be through religion, through culture, through whatever, you came to believe that being different was wrong. I will tell you that to shut that down is not likely to have a great outcome for your child. So there.
Well, thank you so much for that advice. And thank you again so much for taking the time out of your evening, because it sounds like you're super busy all the time. So, but I think no one else has asked any questions. So I think we can wrap it up. So I didn't know. Oh, Brian did ask a question. How do your children address you?
Oh, well, if Sophie is on, I think she might have disconnected because she, either that or she's shy, but she's, so my children have been amazing. I was afraid to come out with my children. And honestly, my daughter Sophie was on, who was been on this call. She was so easy with it that I honestly don't even remember that experience because it was just a non-issue. I do remember one thing that she said though, which was which was when I made it very clear to her that I was trans, she said, we have to create a wolf pack, a posse, so that anybody who gives you a bad time, we got your back. She might not have said it exactly that way, but I do remember her saying wolf pack. She was protective, and she has been nothing but supportive and embracing of that. And it honestly, if she's had a hard time with it, she's given me no sense of that. Only she could really answer that question better than I. My son was amazing in a different, for different reasons, in that while I was going through transition, he was living with us with his girlfriend at the time. And I figured out fairly quickly that his girlfriend was actually very friendly to the community. That she actually had a transgender friend, and I don't know how it came up. And so I felt like, and remember I said I came out to people I didn't know as well earlier because there was like less of a risk. So at a certain point, it's like, you know what? I'm going to see how she responds to this. And so I expressed myself to her before actually anybody in my own family. While it may have felt like a betrayal, it was, again, the safer thing to do. And I was right. She was super supportive. And I swore her to secrecy. I said, do never tell my son about it, because that's for me to tell him. And well, that was pretty naive of me to think that she wouldn't talk to him about it if they had a serious relationship. But about a year later, after I had come out to my wife, she said, you know, we got to make sure the kids know about this. And I said, you're right. Because we had at that point defined that we were going to go forward with it. So I remember calling up my son and saying, hey, can you join us for dinner? And it was at the restaurant my daughter's working at the time, which was many years ago. And he said, yeah. And I said, and don't be late. You know, this is a big deal. And I'm thinking he's probably going to think we're going to have that college talk again. So he said, okay, I won't be late. And so he was only 2 minutes late, which is not late in my book. And he showed up, and to cut to the chase, I remember saying to him, so do you know why I really wanted you to be here? And he said to me, so you could tell me you were trans. And I'm like, what? And I said, how did you know? And he said, oh, Nicole, his girlfriend, she told me a year ago. And I'm like, oh. So, are you upset that she knew first and haven't said anything for a year? And he said, no. I figured you would tell me when you were ready. And, well, that was quite powerful. So I would say that I have been blessed. And I guess I can take some credit because I was their parent, that my children are so sensitive, thoughtful, empathetic, considerate, and loving. So they call me Erica. Well, actually, my daughter calls me Erica. Sometimes she calls me Mom. They don't misgender me. And my son, he doesn't call me Erica because he finds using my first name weird, but he does call me Mom. Sometimes he calls me the Mom number 2, and we all have a big laugh about number 2. Or he just calls me Mom when Kristen's not around. And they both celebrate it. They celebrate us both on Mother's Day. And I always feel bad for my wife because I feel like I've stolen a little bit of her space. But it's not a big deal for her.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions that they want to ask before we wrap up? So I think that's about it, unless you get another question sneaks in there. But thank you so much again, Erica, for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us about this important topic. And again, to everyone that's in the audience, I will send an email with the links that Erica has talked about, her email, if anyone wants to talk to her privately. And Erica, if you have any other websites, any other information you want to send people, feel free to email it to me and I will make sure that goes out as well. Just a reminder, this is being recorded, so if you want to share it with people, it will be up on the library's YouTube website, which you can find access to on our main page. And yeah, before we wrap up, again, there's a survey. If you can take that, that would be super helpful for us. And also just let Erica know how she did today, which I think was fabulous. I have no complaints. I think you did wonderful. And from all the comments, I think everyone else agrees as well. So yes, and I will give you a link to the recording. I will send it to you. But yes, but if no one else has any questions, we will let you get back to what you're to have your night to yourself. So thank you again, Erica, so much.
I just want to be very clear that this is very meaningful for me to be able to do this. So it's not like I got to go back to something more important. I get a lot out of doing this. So I'm so glad to have this opportunity. So thank you, Amy.
Oh,
Thank you,
thank
Dover
you.
Public Library.